Hello, this is Barack Lesnar of Barack Lesnar Hoops, and I told you I would be making this video, and it's going to be a fun one. It is how fantasy basketball is similar to investing. I started investing back in 2015, and the only belief I had that I could be okay at it was the fact that I was really good at fantasy basketball. I figured, hey, it's an app, and I already have to follow a lot of these principles for fantasy basketball. Now, let me be the first to tell you, are they the same thing? No, they are not. They are not. The stakes are a lot higher with investing, but a lot of the principles are very similar. So instead of going into it like, hey, I'm a complete novice at this, you can go to it with a little bit of comfort, knowing that you have a little bit of experience. It's adjacent. A lot of the skills are adjacent, so that means they're not exactly the same, but they're not too far off. If you like this content, please smash that like button for me. Annihilate it, destroy it, eviscerate it, remove it out of existence. You just hit it so hard. And if you're new to Barack Lesnar Hoops, welcome to the channel. Please consider subscribing. And we're at almost 2,500 subscribers. Can you guys believe it? Just a couple of months ago, we were at like 650. It took me 2 years to get 650. And now after that, in 2 months, almost at 2,500. Thank you guys so much for being part of this community. It has grown tremendously in only a couple of months. We have the Discord server, which you definitely need to check out. We've started a partnership with the Fantasy Basketball Wizard Chrome extension, which you also need to check out. All right, so something that is the same in both fantasy basketball and in investing is buying low and selling high. This is the basis of investing. If you buy an asset for more money and then you sell it for cheaper than you bought it, you lose money. If you buy an asset while the value is cheaper and you sell it for more money, you make money. This is the exact same concept with fantasy basketball. If you grab a guy off the waiver wire, okay, and then you're able to trade him for a top guy, that's your profit. Now, if you let go of a top guy, maybe while their value is low, and then you trade for a guy whose value is high, and then your guy goes back to his regular production, and the guy you traded for while his value was high drops to his regular production, then you lost value. So it's a very similar concept that applies to both, and the discipline requires for both is very similar. It can be very tempting to let go of an asset. Let's say you invest in a stock and it drops 20%. It could be very tempting to let go of that stock. And there's situations where you have to let go of that stock, just like you have to let go of the player. Maybe the player's injured and out for a very long time, and it's just not really a choice. It's a sunk cost at that point. But there's situations where a guy's just underperforming for a couple of weeks, and if you hold on just another week, their value increases and you sold low. So now your team is hurting because you dropped the guy while his value was low, or you gave up on him while his value was low, and now when his value is what you expected, he's no longer on your team. It only requires a couple of moves like this to really just tank the strength of your team really quickly. Your team is like a stock portfolio. So every player on your team is like a different company. That's how I view it. So I have 12 guys on my team, 13 guys on my team. I look at my Yahoo Fantasy app. I look at my Fidelity app with my stock investments, or my Robinhood app with my stock investments. Those are my players. If all my players are performing well, I'm making money. If all my players are performing poorly, I'm losing money. Similar concept. If those players, the actual ones, the fantasy basketball players, are performing well, I'm winning. And if they're not performing well, or even a couple are performing really poorly, even if some are performing really well, that can hurt the overall production for my team. So your team is like a stock portfolio. These players are like different companies. But grabbing a guy off the waiver wire, let's say he's injured, and throwing him in your IR, that's like buying a really solid company that had some bad news come out that made the price plummet. So let's say Equifax, a few years ago, there was the huge leak with Equifax where millions of people had their information compromised. This was a very steady stock before that happened, but that news made the stock plummet. And if you bought into Equifax at its lowest point, it's increased significantly since then. So that's similar to picking a guy off of the IR because their value's really low. They got injured, you throw them in the IR, and then eventually their value increases and your team is better for it. Each player has a perceived value, just like in stocks and investments. So the thing you need to know about value is imaginary. It's not something that's tangible. It's something that we all as people come to agree upon, and it changes all the time, and it could change quickly. I'm sure you've seen this. That's why there's different buy low, sell high guys every single week, because the perceived value changes. Yes, there are metrics you can go off of to gauge that value, but things don't always match up. So let's say, for example, Justin Holiday's a guy who produces high fantasy production and has for seasons now, but he tends to have lower value than someone like Blake Griffin, who is more of a known commodity, even though he doesn't perform as well. This is something that we see with the stock market. We see companies that are undervalued relative to what they're actually producing. And you see everything. You see their earnings, you see the money they're making, you see the product is popular, but the price just isn't where you think it should be. That happens in both fantasy basketball, and it also happens with your investments. Now, what happens is if you buy these assets before everyone values them highly, that's when you profit. If you manage to get to a player before everyone else likes them, that's when you get to trade them high. That's when you're able to really help your team. So let's think of the Golden State Warriors. They had Steph Curry, and they signed him to a 4-year, $40 million contract because of the series of ankle injuries that he had early on in his career. Because of his small contract, because they took that gamble, he ended up outperforming that contract significantly. It allowed them to get Klay Thompson and eventually allowed them to get Kevin Durant because his contract was so small relative to the value he was producing. That's why you saw the Golden State Warriors build a dynasty, because they got the opportunity. They bought in low on Steph Curry. It wasn't considered a steal when they made the contract. It wasn't until years later, when he was an MVP caliber player, that all of a sudden that contract became a steal. You want to do something very similar. You want to get to these guys before their value, just because you can predict his value is going to be higher in a few years. I can make this investment safely. Very similar concept. Streaming to me is like day trading, swing trading. Streaming is when you pick up a guy, or you drop a guy, or you keep some streamer spots, and you pick up a guy because he can help you in certain areas, or you expect he's going to produce that day, and then you drop them the next day because for somebody else you think is going to produce better for you in the categories you need. That's kind of like day trading. Day trading, the idea of day trading is you want to buy a stock, you want it to go up some, then you sell it, and then you want to buy another stock hoping that you can pick it up and for it to produce for you as well. There's similar risk with streaming, especially if you're dropping guys that have longer term value. You could pick up a guy who's on the waiver wire who maybe had a great game. You pick them up, and then their next game they go back to being terrible, and now you potentially lost money, or you lost value because you gave up on a guy who had longer term value trying to chase this one-day stream. It's the same thing with day trading. You can let go of an asset because that asset isn't performing that day, even though it's going to perform over the longer term. You drop that asset to pick up a guy or a stock that maybe is up 25-30% that day. Then you buy it when it's 30% higher than usual, hoping it keeps going up, and it doesn't. It just goes back to its regular level, and you just wipe 25-30% of your money you invested in it. So those two concepts are very similar. They can work out for you, but they can also really hurt the long-term strength of your team. Handcuffing. So handcuffing, what I mean by that is, let's say in my 16-team league, I have Mitchell Robinson and then I have Nerlens Noel as a handcuff. If Mitchell Robinson gets injured, Nerlens Noel is going to step up, take those minutes, and he's going to produce at a higher level. So even though I lost Mitchell Robinson, I have an asset that's going to increase in value, which helps dampen the blow of losing Mitchell Robinson. That's the same as hedging your investment. So for example, a popular hedge for people in the stock market is bonds. Bonds tend to not have a ton of value while the dollar and the stock market is doing very well. But like last year, when the stock market crashed, people started going into bonds because they're a safer investment. Or they keep a little bit of bonds, so when the stock market crashes, the bonds go up. They dampen the blow to their portfolio. It's a very similar concept. Handcuffing is simply hedging your investment. Another popular hedge has become Bitcoin. Another popular hedge has become gold. Some people fear that because inflation, the value of the dollar is going to go down, so they keep an investment in gold. So if that happens, the price of gold goes up, they can dampen the blow of the price of the dollar or the valuation of their stocks dropping. Dropping a player underperforming is selling low, which is the same as selling on a stock because the stock dropped, let's say it dropped 5 or 10%, and it's on discount that day, and then you panic, and then you sell it while it's low. And then somebody picks them up off the waiver wire, or somebody gives you, a waiver wire guy for a guy that you think, oh, Robert Covington. Let's bring up Robert Covington. Let's say you drop Robert Covington for a guy who's really overperforming. Let's say someone like Wayne Ellington. You know who you are. Let's say you drop Robert Covington for Wayne Ellington, and then Wayne Ellington proceeds to get injured and not produce anything for you. That is no different than you dropping a stable stock that's underperforming to pick one up that's all of a sudden doing really well for a couple of days, but then crashes back in value to where it traditionally is, while your stock that you so low on now goes back to its regular level and is worth more than the stock you picked up. Very similar concept in both, and something that again just ends up hurting you if you're doing it consistently. Chasing a player overperforming is buying high. Okay? So again, similar situation. You drop a guy that's valuable to buy a guy that's been really good for 3 games, but we know from based on their career, they just have never produced consistently. But they have 3 good games in a row and you think they're gonna keep this up. That's just like buying a stock that's performing really well 3 days in a row, but historically has not, and then it crashes on you. That can wipe the value of your portfolio, and it can wipe the value of your fantasy basketball team. So if you want to see this one, dropping a player underperforming is selling low. Okay, you're letting them go when their value is low, and chasing a player overperforming is buying high. When you sell an asset that's valuable low to buy an asset that's overperforming high, that is one of the key ways to screw yourself over in investments, in fantasy basketball, and the stock market. Pump and dumps. What is a pump and dump? Very similar. A pump and dump, in my opinion, let's think of a pump and dump. A pump and dump GameStop stock. GameStop stock went from a couple of dollars to over $300. So it's been pumped up very highly, and then it dumps. That means all of a sudden the price just starts plummeting. So it dropped down to below $100. If you bought in at $300 and it drops over to $100, guess what? That's a pump and dump. Again, similar situation. Maybe a guy's been performing really well, and then I make a video and say, hey, this guy's killing it. You need to pick him up right now. You need to pick him up right now. And then you drop a guy you believe in, or a guy that has longer term value to pick up that guy that's being pumped up. And then that guy crashes in value and you hurt your fantasy team because of it. So that's a pump and dump. Another investment term that also applies to fantasy basketball. I hope these concepts are making sense to you. Holding the bag. If you're a victim of a pump and dump, holding the bag, what does that mean? Holding the bag means that you bought into a stock when it was really high, the price crashes, and now you're underwater on your investment. You lost money on your investments, and the chances of, not only do you need to reach the high it was at in order to just make your money back, but it has to go above that for you to make a profit. So until that happens, you're holding the bag. You don't have any money. The people who sold to you at the top left you holding the bag. Holding the bag in fantasy basketball would be, let's say you trade for a guy and then that guy gets injured. Until that guy comes back, you're holding the bag. You just gave up some value, and then that player instantly lost most of their value, and you have to wait until they come back just to break even. So that's a concept that's very similar in investing, and it's also very similar in fantasy basketball. You want to avoid being a bag holder, and it can be difficult. It happens to the best of us. Sometimes your analysis just does not work out and you're left holding the bag. The more you are left holding the bag, the worse off you're going to be. You want to be the guy winning trades, or you just don't want to be left holding the bag. It's in either one, it's very hurtful. And something else that's very similar. So let's say a guy gets injured and is out for the season, and it's a season-long league. That's the equivalent of a company that you've invested in going bankrupt and the stock price plummeting to zero. You've lost your investment. If a player's out for the season, you've lost your investment in that player. You drop that player, and then you have to pick one up that you hope can replace some of that lost value, which is similar. Maybe the stock is going bankrupt and you lose a ton of value. You take your money out of that stock and then you buy it in one that's low, hoping that it can build up some of the value that you lost. Bullish, bearish. Bullish and bearish are stock market terms, and they have to do with investments. So bullish means you believe highly in something. You're gung-ho that it's going to be better. You guys could say easily, I'm bullish on Robert Covington, and it would be true. So what does bullish mean? And why is it called bullish? Well, how does a bull attack? A bull attacks with its horns, right? And when it attacks, it gores. So you see the horns upward, like a stock going up. That's called bullish. How does a bear attack? A bear slashes downward. So that's you predicting the the price of the stock is going to go down. That's like, again, that's a term that applies to fantasy basketball. I'm bearish. If I tell you buy low on it, if I tell you not to draft a guy, that means I'm bearish on him. I don't believe in their long-term value to help your team. Just like being bearish on the stock, you think the value of that stock is lower than where it's currently at. So important to know those terms, especially if you ever get into investing and you hear somebody saying they're bullish on something or bearish on something. They're telling you whether they believe in that asset or not. One of the main principles of economics is supply and demand. So the more demand there is for a limited supply, the more value it's going to have. So in fantasy basketball, there's limited supply because there's only one player per league. So if everyone in your league wants that guy, their value is going to be higher. If nobody in your league wants that guy, they're going to have no value. It's a very similar concept in the stock market. If there's X amount of shares, but let's say there's 3 times the amount of people as the amount of shares that want those shares, then that's going to drive the price of the stock up. When there's more shares than people have interest in the shares, that's going to drive the price of the stock down. A great example of supply and demand is the PlayStation 5. I bring it up all the time, but there's a limited supply and way more people wanting it than were available, which is like a guy like myself. I had to pay $800 for my PS5 back in early December because otherwise I wasn't going to get one. So that was me buying high. Similar situation. If you trade for a guy when his value's really high because he just had a great game and everyone's on notice because they had an amazing game, you're going to have to pay more to get him. If you trade for a guy when he just had a series of bad games, that owner's probably going to have to give him up cheaper because nobody else really wants him. So if you're managed to be the one that says, you know what, I think I want him. I'll give you this guy for him. His value's lower, so you end up getting that asset for less. You have to be able to predict when the supply and demand could change. So you want to buy into guys because you predict that down the line there will be a demand for them. Okay? You don't just want to go for guys when the demand already exists, because if you do that, you're always going to be constantly buying high, and the more you buy high, the more you're going to bleed value from your team. Volume. I tell you this with the transaction trends, but one of my favorite indicators when I'm investing in stocks is volume. So let's say over the last year, a stock has a regular volume of 1 million shares sold a day, but suddenly it has 5 million shares of volume. That to me indicates something is happening there. I take notice of that stock and look more into it to find out, why is there suddenly this much volume? There's something happening here. There's either news going to be leaked, just something is happening. And a lot of times, if you make the right calculations, you can end up picking a stock up right before it blows up. I use volume for my waiver wire transaction trends. Volume is the number of pickups for guys on the waiver wire, and I always tell you guys in these videos, hey, something's happening here. All of a sudden there's this volume for this specific player. There's something happening there, and you may want to consider picking them up once they start appearing, and it starts. It could start with only 1,000 pickups, but no one was picking them up the day before. And if you pick them up early enough, those are the same guys where a week later now they have 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 pickups, and now they're harder for you to get. So very similar concept in both. Panic selling, we've covered this intensively already, but panic selling is a player has a terrible game or two. Steph Curry, for example. Steph Curry has had like 2 or 3 terrible games for me. And I know people are dropping him. You can see it. People are dropping him. People are giving up on him. That is panic selling or panic dropping. Panic selling is you give up on a stock because the price did not perform where you expected. But just like with the stock market, the next game that player goes back to performing. And if you pick them up when somebody dropped them and they start producing at the regular level, that helps your team. That's profitable. If you sold them while their value was low, then they continue producing at a high level. Unless you picked up a guy that was equivalent. If you picked up a streamer that was playing at a high level and normally doesn't play at a high level, then you're going to take a loss. So panic selling can really be detrimental to the value of your fantasy basketball team. It could also be very detrimental to the value of your stock portfolio. Okay? Tracking performance trends, I mentioned it before with volume, but tracking performance trends is with a stock, just seeing how it's been performing over the last year, the last few months, the last few years, so that you can establish a baseline for that stock. So a floor for a stock, let's say it's been a year, and let's say I know the lowest price for a stock is $5 a share. Okay? We've established over the last year, the lowest it's been, it's $5, and let's say right now it's around $7. And let's say the high for that stock is $12. But it was consistently between $5 and $8, and I'm buying in at $7. I can track that performance, and then I can tell myself, well, chances are the floor for this stock is $5. It's currently at $7, so that's my downside. I'm predicting that that's the downside. It's going to be $5. And you could see this with your chart. Have you ever seen a stock chart? That's all a stock chart is, okay? And something I want to add, a stock chart, don't look at it as math. A stock chart is emotions. Anytime you see a stock shoot up in a stock chart, that means people were crazy about that stock. When you see it sharply drop, that means people were scared of that stock. That's no different than fantasy basketball. When you see a guy being picked up, 25,000 people pick up a guy in one day, That's the same as on a stock chart, the stock performing really highly. But when you see the red, a guy being dropped heavily, maybe because of injury or whatever, or just bad performances, that means people panic, people are scared, and they let go of them so that they don't hurt their team. These concepts are almost identical. And if you were to chart where guys were picked up and dropped, it would look like the charts for a stock. So I think it's very important for you to establish a baseline production for a player that's based on multiple seasons. So, you know, this is what I can expect. And maybe they're performing slightly under that. And if they're consistently performing under that baseline, that's concerning. But if maybe they're close to that baseline and you know this is about as bad as it gets, but normally they just perform here, this is what their upside limit is, here's what the downside is, then you may want to consider that move. Another great example is Robert Covington. I'm going to keep bringing him up. He had a double-double today, but the reason I bring him up is because he's consistently performed well for 5 years, but we've seen him perform poorly for about a month, okay? And because he's performed poorly for about a month, his production on a chart would be lower than the production we're used to seeing from him. So then you can calculate, well, he's healthy, he's getting minutes. You calculate the fit on the team. You're like, here's where he can produce. Here's what we've seen him produce the last 5 years. This is his upside. He's performing near the floor right now, or maybe even slightly beneath the floor. But I know based on the tracking his performances over the last 5 years, that if he turns it on, he can produce at this level for me. And if you manage to do that successfully with just a few companies, you can make a lot of profit. Just like if you do that successfully with a few players, you can make your team incredibly hard to beat. And the last one I want to discuss is projecting, extrapolating. And I think I cut off the NG in my presentation. My bad. That should say extrapolating. And extrapolating, projecting is just what I told you. Projecting where a guy can be and acting on where he can be rather than where he is right now. One of the worst things you can do is just make decisions based on what an asset is doing at the moment. So for an example, I project that Robert Williams, based on how great of a shot blocker he is in 15 minutes per game, I project, and based on the role he has on that team, based on the fact they don't have great centers on that team, based on the fact that he's young and has upside, I project that at some point he could get 20 to 25 minutes per game and get me 2 or more blocks per game. That's hypothetical. We don't know that that's happening, but it's the same thing you do with a stock. You can project based on what I'm seeing, based on their sales numbers, based on what the guidance I'm getting from the CEO of this company. I'm projecting this stock could be worth X amount in 12 months. So if I buy it right now, I like the upside for this stock to perform higher. It's the same exact deal. I have Robert Williams on a few teams where there's guys performing better than he is right now. They're getting more consistent minutes right now. But I'm projecting that at some point, just reading the tea leaves, he's going to possibly get 20, 25 minutes consistently and be one of the best shot blockers in the league. His value's really low right now. He's owned in like 10% of leagues. So it's a projection I'm making that a lot of people are not making. And if you get in the habit of making projections and those projections end up being true, and you get there before everyone else does, that's how you build a strong team, because you dropped your worst player to get Robert Williams. But if you wait until he does get 25 to 30 minutes, you may have to give up a mid-round player to get the chance to have him on your team. I hope that makes sense. All right, guys, I really hope this video was educational. I hope it was fun. And I hope you understand why I say fantasy basketball, fantasy sports in general are actually very similar to investing. That's what you're doing. So hopefully you learned something. If you did learn something, do me a favor, comment below and let me know your thoughts. Your thoughts are what keep me going. Their thoughts are very validating. I love the engagement from this community. I love all you guys. And if you like this video, do me a favor and again, smash that like button. Subscribe to Barack Lesnar Hoops. And if you have not I am going to be doing my Rate My Team video tomorrow, and let me show you what you need to do. This is the official Discord server of Barack Lesnar Hoops, and I want you to join it. We now have 168 members, and the Discord server's only been out a few days. We're up to 168 members, growing quickly. And if you go join the Discord server, you can join Rate My Team right here. You can post your team, and I am going to review it, okay? I'm going to review your team on my next video. And if you want to be included in that video, which I know a lot of you do, you have to join the Discord server, post your team in there, and when I make my video, I'm going to rate your team. Now, if there's too many in there, I may not be able to get to your team, but if you want to ensure that I do get to your team, then you can join the Patreon only channels, and you do that by becoming a Patreon. You can check out the Patreon link in the description below, and once you're a Patreon supporter, you go ahead and you post and rate my team, and you're gonna have first dibs. And if you join the highest tier, you get to message me directly with any questions you have about your teams. You're paying only a couple of bucks, but it's like having me in your corner to help you with your fantasy basketball team to the same degree I help myself with my fantasy basketball teams. There's so many people reaching out for help. There's a strong community of people here helping you, answering your questions. But if you want direct help from me, then I need you to be a Patreon supporter, and I will make it worth your while. So if you have not joined that Discord server, go ahead and do that. Watch one of these videos above as recommended by the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't yet, download the Fantasy Basketball Wizard Chrome extension. They have some exciting updates coming soon. That's all I can say. I can't say any more than that. All right, y'all. Until next time, this is Barack Lesnar Hoops. There are the videos. Watch them. Take care.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Sid the Kid, aka Detroit Snoop, aka Coach B. I'm a Yahoo Diamond Tier Fantasy Basketball Manager for the past 7 consecutive years. I wanted to give a quick shout out and show support to my day one, Barack Lesnar. I call him Superfly, only he knows why, with Barack Lesnar Hoops. Barack Lesnar brings you the most up-to-date content. He gives you the most direct interaction, breaking news, quality analysis, trade advice, what Robert Covington had for dinner last night. I kid on that last one, but hey, he brings swag to the swag list. So if you want educated yet enjoyable content given to you from a fun personality, get at my boy, Mr. Heyman, if you please.
Barack Lesnar.
Hey, and maybe become a diamond tier manager like myself.